Right. So, greetings and thank you for joining us today for Hope NCCU's Collegiate Recovery Community monthly live stream, where we focus on different behavioral and process addictions, as well as positive coping strategies to avoid these issues. Because it is Mental Health Awareness Month, we would like to have a discussion with some amazing individuals who are part of the mental health community. Without further ado, I am Julia Loud, a graduate assistant here at North Carolina Central University's Collegiate Recovery Community, and joining me today as my co-host is Miss Demia Millhouse.
Good day, everybody. My name is Demia Millhouse, and I'm the other graduate assistant to the COC program here at North Carolina Central. It's great seeing you all today.
And we would like to introduce our special guests, Mr. Jarmichael Harris and Dr. Dominique Clemens James. How are you both doing today?
All right. Happy to be here.
Yes,
Doing
and we're
great.
happy to have y'all. We're very excited. And we want to start with just a quick introduction question. Can you tell us a little about yourself and what made you get into the field? And also, what is your current position? And we can start with Dr. CJ or Mr. Jarmichael.
CJ.
All right. And that was a whole lot. So, we will start with the easiest. My current position, I'm an assistant professor at East Carolina University. I'm in the Rehabilitation and Addiction Studies department. Um, what was your first question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, of course. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself? What
Mhm.
made you get into this specific field,
Right.
and what is your current position?
Okay. So a little bit about me. I've always been just kind of enamored with things like human behavior, mental health stuff. So I started with an AP Psych class in high school, and then I fell in love with the human brain and became a therapist. And then I started stemming out into the realm of collegiate recovery, simply because there was a very powerful intersection of the thing I love about people, behaviors, thought patterns, and things like that, as well as, challenges to just trying to, exist on this earth. And, collegiate recovery was one of those areas of, it was on the cutting edge of, development. It's fairly new, especially to me. And I just kind of grew very passionate about helping people to kind of take control over their lives and their recovery the best way that they would like to.
Yeah. For me, it's interesting, right? Like I found myself in the field of like mental health and in particular substance use, um, like treatment with high school students back in 2010. And it didn't take me very long to recognize that the system in which we treat people is broken. And that actually extends even to how the families of the person that's getting treatment is also interacting with the system and what have you. And so I like to tell this story a lot, but I won't take a lot of time, right? So in working at a treatment center for high school students, there were kids that we would see that would show up to treatment multiple times, right? Like one particular kid, I saw him at 13, 15, and then again at 17. And at 15 and 17, he actually did really well in treatment. But it was the simple fact that he was going back into an environment that was not matching what he was experiencing in treatment. And so I knew there was a disconnect and a gap there and didn't know what that was exactly until I saw the film The Anonymous People. I'm sure that you've shown it on your campus 1,000 times. But for me, it made sense, right? It helped me to recognize that yes, treatment does work, but if we're not doing the exact same type of support and treatment to the community and for the household, then we're sending people back into a burning house essentially. And so for me, collegiate recovery was a bridge to pulling people out of the fire and keeping them out the fire. And so I had the opportunity to help start a collegiate recovery program at East Carolina University, where that was essentially the mindset that I would use the skills and techniques that we taught and learned at the treatment center to build recovery capital or recovery management systems and all of those things that students would need to be successful while in school and pursuing their recovery. And I mean, I guess I did that to a point that was fairly successful, because now I get the opportunity to help to support all the campuses across the state of North Carolina in building out their programs, supporting their programs, and things of that nature.
I mean, clearly,
That
at
was
least a little successful. Just a little bit. A little bit.
that was amazing to you both. I had the same experience. Started in high school, took an AP psychology class, and was led to more interested in the Black mind. So that was amazing. And you both kind of answered our next question, which is, what was your experience in pioneering and development of the collegiate recovery community on the campus of North Carolina universities?
So I will touch base on that a little bit more. So I started at North Carolina A&T State University, and they were one of the pilot schools in North Carolina to start collegiate recovery. And we had an interesting spin on it because we had access to a population that was basically untouched and untapped. And so students of color, African American students, Black students, and crossing that realm of recovery with those identities was definitely a pioneering experience. Came with its own kind of unique barriers and challenges. More specifically, I mean, just kind of thinking of it bigger picture scale, it seemed as though, recovery and treatment and substance use treatment and all those things seemed like an institution that was not for this population, or at least that's the way it was viewed. And so, in my experiences pioneering that program, a lot of psychoeducation around what recovery means, what it could look like, and then kind of turning it over to the student body to describe and define that more often, was the biggest part of my experience. Really getting them to branch out and take it and mold it and make it their own, as opposed to you do it this way and then it's done.
Yeah. And for me, similarly, Dr. CJ has that experience of recognizing that collegiate recovery wasn't very open to students of color. And I had the experience of recognizing that collegiate recovery really wasn't very open to faculty and staff of color, right? That the first national collegiate recovery conference that I went to, I could count on one hand the number of Black people in the room. And I was probably one of 3 Black men in the room. And this was the national conference. And for several years, I was really one of 3 Black men coordinators nationally for quite some time. And, we see that shifting. I was excited to see Trayshawn Cooks come along and really, dive into this work and be excited about it. And I told him that probably the first time that I met him, and it probably scared him a bit, but he stuck it out. Um, and I say that, right, because it's one thing for folks to know that recovery is accessible to them. It's another thing for them to see it in action. And I'm not in recovery myself, but representation does matter, right? Like I I don't necessarily need a doctor, right, to look like me and have all my same experiences for me to get healing. But I certainly trust a doctor that looks like me, um, because I know that they understand some of the intricacies that go along with why I'm showing up in their office in the first place. And so, for me, collegiate recovery is very much kind of the same way. That, while I'm not in recovery, I hope to understand a little bit better than maybe some of my other colleagues as to why a student of color, in particular, a Black male, would show up to a collegiate recovery community and seek help. And trust that I could do that to the best of my ability. And as Dr. CJ said, right, put that back in the hands of the students. Say, hey, now that you're here, what is it that you're looking for? How can we help you?
Yes, thank you both. And our next question, you guys, you both did touch on in your previous statements. It is, what have you noticed about the development of these programs in North Carolina and throughout the nation on both a collegiate and high school level?
I would say that collegiate recovery is starting to become more of a household name, so that makes a lot more sense. Like I remember being going into rooms like your program does what now, and having to explain myself everywhere. And why do we need to keep this? Like, and now it's such a staple that like it's untouchable, it's immovable. And I like that development. Another thing I've kind of noticed is there is more of a focus on diversity, equity, inclusion stuff. And that's program to program, whether it's nationally or locally. I mean, it's not quite there yet, but there is noticeable effort in these ways to not only be aware of identities that are also under the umbrella of recovery, but how do we support them? How do we, help and promote content and create content that speaks to their needs and whatnot, as well as, how do we keep our spaces inclusive?
Mhm. Yeah, I'll say from a North Carolina standpoint, we started with one program about 10 years ago with UNC Charlotte, and that ballooned to six. And now we're probably just shy of 20, I'm sorry, just shy of 30 programs across our state, but we still only have two recovery high schools.
Mhm.
Those recovery high schools are the Emerald School of Excellence in Charlotte and the Wake Monarch Academy in Raleigh. And while that's great, I think we really need to start to again looking at that burning house. And let me find another analogy, right? The other analogy I like to use is the healing forest, right? So if we now develop a healing forest at the collegiate level, but now I think it's time to expand our reach and expand our territory in a lot of ways to ensure that those high school students that I was working with at the treatment center that are showing up in treatment at 13 years old have a high school they can go to that provides similar supports and resources, and have that be able to expand the breadth of their academic career even through grade school. Because as we know, as as cannabis is being looked at much differently, not only in our state but across the nation, um, the onset of cannabis use recreationally, like just a couple of times a week, is actually contributing to the increased mental health challenges of our youth, and also including suicidality. That's actually an article that just came out this past week. Be happy to link that for you at the end of this conversation. But it's important, right, that we're having these conversations in such a way that we're not just minutely looking at where we are, but taking a broader scope back to say, all right, what are the implications of the decisions that we're making, especially when it comes to our youth.
I think the best thing about the existence of recovery high schools in general is it is an opportunity to disrupt the, prison pipeline, because that means if we can put another structure in place that follows them from high school all the way into higher ed, one, if they're exposed, then that means they're more likely to go to college, they're more likely to go to grad school. And it's like being able to set a second structure in that way is powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you both for that information and insight. I think you guys are doing such a great job in trying to reach out into the younger generation and showing that there are different options than what they see. And I think the collegiate recovery is doing such an amazing job in trying to support everybody of all different race and ethnicities. And it's obvious that you guys are having such a great time and enjoying your roles and reaching out to these individuals, which leads us to our next question. Do you think is the most enjoyable aspect of your role?
I'll go first, if that's okay with you,
Go
Dr.
for
CJ.
it. Go for it.
I think for me, the biggest thing that I probably enjoy the most is seeing students be able to reclaim their lives. One of the things that when I was at ECU, I was really still just pulling the pieces of this puzzle together in terms of what a collegiate recovery community will look like. And one young lady who was a part of our program um, had multiple run-ins with conduct at our institution. And before we had a collegiate recovery community, there wasn't many resources for them. And then we finally built our program out, and she got in trouble yet again. And instead of pushing this young lady to suspension or even expulsion, which probably raised the level of expulsion depending on some of who may have looked at her file, said, hey, go have a conversation with the collegiate recovery community. And that young lady was able to walk into her 21st birthday sober, and has maintained her sobriety, albeit some challenges, has been able to maintain her sobriety, is now a licensed social worker.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I would say for me, because there's been quite a few shifts in just my experience in the collegiate recovery world. Starting out, it was helping students to bring ideas to fruition, meaning it's like, well, I feel like we need this kind of group on campus, or I feel like we need this kind of resource under this, umbrella of collegiate recovery. And, really holding in my resources to help them make that happen was huge. But since I've shifted to more of like a consulting kind of role with the work I do with HBCUs and their programs, the most rewarding thing is being able to encourage them, highlight their work, and letting them know that the work they're doing is amazing. Because I mean, sure, we are a pocket, we are a niche, but we are doing work that no one else is doing. And everyone is like, oh, well, we need to do something. We are doing something. Y'all just aren't a part of that yet. And I think being able to lift up people that are doing the heavy lifting, that's the most rewarding for me.
That's definitely amazing to hear, like from both accounts, hearing, how the program and the CRC, seeing firsthand how it helps people, and then also witnessing and being able to lift up those that do the work within the program are both very rewarding experiences. And this brings us to our next question, which goes into understanding mental health and mental health literacy on college campuses. So, mental health literacy is an important aspect to have in college. What would you say is the biggest outcome that students can experience by not focusing on their mental health?
The best way I could describe it is feeling imbalanced. So for me, the program I started out in, our collegiate recovery was housed directly under our counseling program. And so I was really glad about that, because a lot of times, a lot of universities and college campuses, they have a wellness committee and they have a campus rec and they have a student wellness and counseling and all that. And it feels very disconnected. So it's just like you created this whole plate with all these things to go on this plate. But if students don't pick from everything, there's a huge imbalance there. And so to focus on physical health isn't necessarily bad, but if we're not taking care of the mental, if we're not taking care of the emotional, it's like, okay, well, then we're experiencing a whole lot of things. We may be experiencing things like anxiety, depression, things like that. So physically we may feel good because we've got biology working for us with endorphins and whatnot, but once that settles, we're kind of just with ourselves. And if we don't know how to be with ourselves, that mental health piece, it could be a little distracting and challenging.
Yeah. I think back to where we were just a short few years ago in the COVID isolation, right? Like our college students find themselves, especially at many of our HBCUs, like achieve, 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 do, be involved in everything. And then the moment the world shut down, individuals were left to basically be by themselves and be with themselves. And they realized that all the things that they were running from, whether it be big T trauma or little T trauma, were now starting to show themselves in their lives, and they had to find that balance, as Dr. CJ said. And so the interesting thing for me and what I experienced during that time period as a program coordinator was that students were finding us online, right? Like Google searching like addiction recovery or supports or whatever, ECU, Greenville, and we were popping up, whether it be like the Twitter or Facebook, our website, and they're reaching out, like DMing our organization saying, hey, how can I be a part? What do you have for me? And again, when I asked them, hey, like, not only how did you find us, but why did you find us? It was, I don't know how to be by myself. Like, I'm realizing that I've had things that I probably should have worked on all along. And this is the first time I'm actually having to address it because I don't have a calendar that's booked me from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And I'm sleeping from, you know, 8:30 to 7:30.
Mhm.
Yes, thank you. Can you give us some advice to students on what they should do if a friend or loved one is experiencing signs of poor mental health symptoms?
From a prevention aspect, I would say, regardless of where you are or where they are, be familiar with resources. Because as much as we, care about someone or are close to someone and want to jump in and help, we're probably just not equipped to do that. But we still feel that driven need to do something. And so to have kind of that toolbox of, well, did you know that such and such downtown has this available? Maybe you want to check it out. Or, if you're on campus together, hey, I know where the, wellness office is or the CERT counseling office is. Would you like to walk there together? Like being supportive, but also maintaining your own boundaries and your own mental health is going to be a key here. Um, and so I think that's the biggest piece of advice is yes, be helpful, but don't be like the sole amount of help. Don't be, overly invested because then you start to impact yourself.
Yeah. And I think along with that, right? You don't have to be a mental health professional. Like we have mental health professionals to do that work. And for those who are in training to be a mental health professional, understanding that not every person is your project. Um, and self-care is key. So knowing where the resources are is paramount. But beyond that, just getting comfortable having uncomfortable conversations, right? That idea that either yourself or someone is going to have a moment where they're just going to need
Mhm.
someone to talk to, and you can be that person to an extent, right? In the moment that that conversation starts to go outside of where you feel comfortable, um, being able to say, hey, I'm glad that we're having this conversation, but I think at this point, I really need to, you know, have a conversation. I really need for you to go to the counseling center. I need you to, go online and see about, additional resources or whatever, what have you. And then again, if you have that toolbox like Dr. CJ is talking about, then you can walk them through some of those steps. Also being very aware of what your campus has in terms of anonymous reporting, because even though you've had that conversation, and the individual may or may not be receptive, you can do those. I'm not sure what you call on your campus, but a lot of our campuses call it care, right? So you go to ECU care or NCCU care and put in um that anonymous inquiry, about someone. And the interesting thing about that too is this one thing I really appreciate. Even though that person may have opened up to you, and you may be the only person they've opened up to, if their life is really falling out of whack and out of space, like they're conveying to you that it is, it's probably showing up in other areas as well. And the professor may have picked up on that, even if they haven't addressed it with them. And the professors have the opportunity to make those anonymous reports. And oftentimes we do, just because we recognize that, grades are slipping or assignments aren't coming at the same time and, on time and things of that nature. We make those reports all the time. So the student themselves, even though that student may come out to you, you still have that level of, hey, like anybody could have made that report. And so, you know, you have those opportunities now.
Yeah.
I think that's definitely very important. And there's so many stigmas around mental health. And I feel like the CRC does an amazing job with supporting those in need in many different facets. And with that, starting the conversation about mental health can be hard, especially for those in college, you know, having friends that may not understand it or working to help educate others about it. And you all did touch on this next question in your previous statements, but what advice could you give to students who are wanting to start the conversation around about mental health with their friends?
Mhm. I would say it just kind of depends on obviously the situation and the reason for the approach in the first place. Whether it be for themselves or whether it be something, you know, they notice with friends. Observations are always, you know, a good opener in my opinion, whether it's an observation about just kind of how you feel your life is going or how, you know, your friends are presenting to you. That's always a good opener into mental health. I think the title and, you know, just phrase of mental health puts people on edge simply because it's just like, oh, well, this means it's official, this means it's problematic. When in actuality, it's literally just a informal conversation of noticing some things going on for you. You good over there? Like, do you need something? Is everything okay? Is Mercury in retrograde kicking your butt? Like, what is happening? Because I think a lot of times when we're shouldering mental health stuff, we don't think it's noticeable. Um, and, you know, especially for someone that's kind of starting to bring more awareness to themselves and doing their self work, sharing those observations of, I'm starting to notice this is a recurring pattern for myself. Can we talk about it? Like things like that. It's a very informal thing. It just requires, you know, genuineness and personhood. It doesn't necessarily mean, oh, you are way up here and you need some help, so go get it, you know.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that I'm always an advocate for is finding your tribe and knowing who has your back, right? And so I have multiple group texts from essentially different men in my life that have played a role. And so we all kind of check in on each other at different points and times. And so just this past week, because we have such, you know, open conversation and things, and we're always checking in on each other, I asked one group of my friends what their hurricane preparedness was. And one individual said, "Hey man, I got Jesus and a couple canned goods." Like, and another one of my friends was like, "Well, you know, actually, I just bought a generator on sale last year." So right there, you see that there are different levels of thought process and preparedness around that one particular topic. And so, what we walked away from after that short conversation was maybe we need to hop on a Zoom call and have a more thorough plan for my man that, you know, ain't surviving with a candle and, you know, a can of spam. And, you know, the funny thing is that conversation could have easily been about mental health, right? Because we check in with each other so often, we can have the kind of like off the wall, kind of off topic, like inquiry, and then really find some stuff out, right? So if you're checking in with your people and your tribe in such a way, you know, the next question I literally could ask is, hey, you know, and we do this on regular, so it's not quite the same thing, but like, hey, you know, how's your mental health? Or what is your mental health, you know, strategy, your plan? And when someone says, "Hey, like you know, you know, hey, I pray and let God figure it out," cool. But what else can we do for that? And do we need to have a more in-depth conversation so that you have a more well-rounded here and now approach? Because you know, obviously, like I say all the time, you can have Jesus and a therapist too. Um, but also, what are your practical steps to ensuring that your mental health is solid every day? I also happen to be a huge fan of T Pain. And so he has a podcast, a Nappy Boy Radio podcast. And the question that he asks every guest is, how was your mental health? Right. And so the fact that we're even asking those questions on such platforms, and it's not like a one-off question, but it's actually a question that is probably the first or second question they ask on every episode, really shows that, we are at a place where we can start to have these conversations more broadly and more openly.
Thank you for that. And just to let you know, this next question is a multi-part question. I'll ask the first question and then give you time to answer and then go to the second part. What are your views on maintaining a healthy mental health status while in college?
So the example that I like to use, right, is that I was told when I was in school that you could have your grades, you could have your social life, and you could have sleep, but you could not have all three. That has to be the wildest lie that I've ever heard in my life. The first off, to simplify into grades, social life, and sleep is not the life that any of us live. Right? We have work, we have organizations, we have all these other things that are playing in. So what used to look like a triangle now looks like a hexagon or octagon, or sometimes they have straight lines. You just surviving every day, right? So what I say is prioritize the things that make the sense for you. And then before that, though, prioritize the things that allow you to show up to be your best self, whatever that means for you in that particular day, each and every day. And so sometimes it might not be the grades, right? Like, and somebody made this joke last week. I think they were asked to speak to a group of middle school kids or high school kids going into dual enrollment, and they told the students, plain and simple, C's get degrees, and the kids laughed, and the parents were like ready to chop their head off. But at the end of the day, if that's the best that you have in this particular moment to handle all the other stuff that you have going on in your world, like, that C is gonna be okay.
Mm. Totally gonna co-sign everything that Jay just said and add my tidbit of, in my experiences as a college counselor, there is nothing more gut-wrenching and heartbreaking than someone completely melting down because they are 3 points away from an A. They got their first C, they failed their first test, and it's like it has torn down their entire self-identity because, especially in the Black community, I have to be Black excellence. I have to exude that all the time. I can't rest. I'll sleep tomorrow. I'll just eat noodles. I'll do this, this, and this. And we're putting all of our philosophical eggs in this one basket. And whenever we tilt it a little bit, all of them fall out simply because it's unbalanced. It it is never that serious where you should choose your health, your mentality over a grade. Never that serious. Never that serious. And C's get degrees, yeah, it's laughable, but it's accurate. It's accurate. And for those that always come back, it's like, well, I mean, would you want the doctor that got a C work on you in surgery? Yes, because he's a surgeon. And so your best, and I like the emphasis you put of your best, your personal definition of what the best version of yourself is, should be the priority. Whether that means, well, we're going to get a B on this paper, but I'm going to watch my show. That phrase right there was a life-changing event for me in my master's program. I was stressing. I was up till 3 in the morning doing this, got to class the next day. One of my classmates was like, I mean, it's whatever, but I was watching my show. And I looked at her horrified. You could get a B. But I lost sleep. I mean, my anxiety was out of control. And for what? So I'm all about balance, balancing personal definitions of self, perspective, balancing activities, thought patterns, people, relationships, all of those things.
I definitely agree with you both personally. I've definitely had that experience where it's all or nothing over an introductory exam. It's definitely a reality check for a lot of students, and a lot of students coming and ending college when they get to realize that school is almost done, but all I've known was school. So it's definitely an eye opener, and thank you for that insight. If you could, can you also discuss the negative coping activities that students may choose to do if their mental health falters?
You said negative coping.
Mhm.
I am anti-depression nap, guys. Don't do it. Don't do it. Because that, unfortunately, yes, it's comforting. You want to feel some kind of warmth. You want physical stimulation. You want, a bit more of a slower pace. And those things aren't necessarily bad. The bad part is that depression naps give us all those things, but it also disrupts our sleep cycle. It disrupts our chemical balance in our brain, and it fuels rumination. So take a nap, sure, but no more than 30 minutes. Typically the best way to kind of get out of that loop is to plan for something to do after that 30 minutes, whether it's I gotta go water the plants or I told myself I was gonna walk around the block, whatever that is. Because otherwise we're involuntarily falling into a negative mental health cycle and we need to kind of voluntarily wrestle that back.
Yeah. It's funny, right? And I think this is probably some of my own stuff that I had to deal with. But the naps were my go-to. And one of the things that I've always found was no matter how bad I felt before the nap, I would actually feel worse because especially when it came to like deadlines or like whatever work was on the table that had me in that space, it would still do. And so I think that was also one of those things that led me to understanding C's get degrees, and I just need to do whatever best I can in this particular moment, and be okay with it, and not sleep my worries away and hope for the best afterwards because that didn't help either. And so I think if there's a part two to that or another um, unhealthy coping, I'll go to substances, right? Like substances, they work, which is why we use them. But also understanding that at some point you still have to deal with whatever is leading you to those in the first place. Um, and again, like not necessarily that you can't have, that beer to unwind or roll up every now and then if that's what you're choosing to do. But once you start to find patterns in that, it's time to start to check your motives, and really better understand why it is that you're choosing that particular thing in those particular moments. One of the and no, I get long-winded. I apologize. One of the things that I found in my schooling experience was we will be given an assignment to abstain from a particular thing for a period of time, right? To give these counselors in training the opportunity to better understand a little bit of what those that will sit in front of us one day experience. And I did not recognize how. How certain things that I did were tied to rituals of quote unquote relaxation. For me, it was like you go through school all week, bust your butt, and then you stand in front of the TV with your cookout tray and a huge iced tea, and like how comforting that felt. And when I gave up fast food for like the month or so that was, I started to recognize what it was about that ritual and not having that cookout tray in that particular moment meant something completely different. And so, again, being able to understand those patterns in your life and um, make the appropriate adjustments as needed.
It's not recreational if it's a permanent fixture.
I think those were some amazing points. And even like in my personal life, I definitely feel like there were times where I like took the naps and it gave me like some temporary relief, but it could be sustained over time. And I realized it did more harm than good. Maybe it felt good in that moment, but it wasn't working towards sustaining a positive mental health and wellness. And I also like that it was mentioned doing stuff maybe recreationally. You know, it's okay to have fun and doing it ever so often, but also not making it permanent. You know, it's not recreational if it's permanent. I think that's you both made some amazing points there because as a college student, it is hard to fall, you know, to not fall in those negative coping strategies. So I think that's definitely important and definitely great advice. And that leads us into our next question, which is a two-part question. Can you discuss some of the ways that you work to support students who are experiencing addictive behaviors or different mental health concerns? And what assistance do you provide to them?
I'm gonna have to let you go on that one, Dr. CJ. I feel like I've been out of that realm for a little bit of time now.
Um, as I mentioned before, balance is a really big key in my life, as well as just kind of being personable and genuine with people. And so using, those two mantras and tools, really getting to the bottom of, okay, well, how do you visualize this? What do you see your landscape as right now? Like what's the lay of the land? What's the house? What's the tree? What's all this? And what purpose do they serve? And in no time during that am I like, oh, well, you need to get rid of this, you need to get rid of that, blah, 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 because that's not my business. I don't go home with you at the end of the day. You do. I don't have the vision for yourself that you do. And so figuring out, okay, well, let's flip this rock over here. It seems like it's got a lot of weight and it's throwing you off balance a little bit. What do you think about that? And I think it speaks a lot, and this is where the, being personable thing comes in. Nobody likes to have a finger waggled at them and saying, well, what you're doing is wrong or what you're doing is bad, but still being expected to lead and to take initiative and to be successful, because all of those things mean you just, one, stand by yourself and have to make your own decisions, whether you're comfortable or not. And nobody likes for someone to just randomly come up and say, oh, well, all that effort you just put in is wrong. That's not my goal. My goal is to give you that power, to empower you to say, okay, I put all these pieces on the board and I can move them where I want to. And if I want the picture to look like this, the picture's gonna look like this.
Mhm.
So, support. I do still do therapy on the side. I do teletherapy with a number of platforms, and so I do have a lot of just kind of young adults and whatnot, really just trying to figure things out, and that's typically the approach I take, whether it's substance use, whether it's college level, career aspects, whatever.
Yeah, yeah. And I was just joking with Dr. CJ. She knows this. I've been out of direct services now for about 2 years. So I had to go back to think about, all right, what are my philosophies? What was it that I do? And so one of the things that I really lean on, especially with the students that I was working with in the recovery space, is, I'll believe in you until you have the strength to believe in yourself. And then also providing you the tools and the 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 things that you need to figure those pieces out. And I think what happens for a lot of individuals, especially when they walk into therapy, is this idea, a little bit of imposter syndrome that they walk into it with, right? That one, they never thought they would see themselves in our office in the first place, and then two, now that they're here, you know, what does this look like? What are the images in my head about what therapy is and ought to be that they might need to let go of and just be and understand that I am their biggest fan and their advocate, and they have that hour, typically is what it is, an hour to just be themselves and let things out. And so those are my two philosophies.
Yes, thank you so much both to you both for that insight. And that goes into our next question. Being on a HBCU campus, we're working with students direct in our direct communities. And with that, do you believe that a barrier between African American college students and mental health services is a lack of knowledge of mental health importance and or other beliefs or behaviors that could contribute to that ideology?
I wouldn't necessarily say it's a lack of knowledge. Um, just kind of in my experience, it's Oh, the best way to describe it is trust. I have to be able to trust a system and able to use a system. And like Jay was saying earlier, I'm more likely to trust and feel comfortable in a system if it's filled with people that look like me, or can relate to me based on culture. So I don't necessarily think like, especially just kind of generationally speaking, the last 3 to 4 generations, they're very pro mental health. They're very pro, self-regulation and emotional regulation. They're very pro, let's work through this generational trauma. But at the same time, it's still a very independent process. It's still a very isolated process, which means we're cut off from tools that we may need that could make that process easier. And so trust with systems that provide those tools, I think, is the biggest barrier.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. Again, I don't think it's a lack of information, especially with as much information that we have at our fingertips, literally. But I think it is stepping into a space that has never really felt for us. Um, you know, Dr. CJ mentioned generational curses. Um, for a lot of us, the easy part of that generational curse stuff was going to college and getting a degree, right? That was hardly even scratching the surface. It's doing the real work and addressing those things, and also recognizing that as a part of that, you probably are cutting off, or at least separating yourself temporarily from what might have been your biggest support, in order to address those generational curses. And I think that's the part that fears many of us the most.
Challenging the system you came from is really hard work.
Hmm.
I definitely agree. Personally, when I decided to go back to graduate school, I got a lot of questions. Well, why didn't you go to a different school? Most importantly, why didn't I go to a PWI? Well, my first thought was, well, how can I be sure that the education at a PWI is going to benefit those that I aim to benefit, which is the same people who are me? So it's definitely important to have somebody in your corner and to get help from those who look exactly like you because the issues are different. It's definitely an important aspect. Our next question is, do you believe, what are some beneficial resources and tools that the Collegiate Recovery Program should have, i.e. peer support groups, digital and campus visibility, etc., and what kind of support do these resources provide?
Um, I will start by gently directing you to the chat, but I will say campus visibility is a big part of it, simply because the biggest assumption that programs and resources make is that people know you exist and are actively looking for you. Neither of those is guaranteed, neither of those is true. Um, because I can't, discover what you're trying to offer me, or I can't research you or get to know you if I don't even see you. So being in places that are unusual, hanging out in front of the CAF, or setting up shop in a residence hall or at the campus rec center for a little bit, that campus visibility helps us to get into places and pockets that we normally wouldn't be able to.
Yeah. Being visible is key. Um, when I was in the work, using social media was a huge benefit for us. Not to the extent that Dr. CJ was able to do at A&T. I didn't have the capacity or probably even the know-how to do a lot of the amazing things that she was able to do with her social media, and what I see Hope doing as well, right? You all are doing some really great stuff. Um, but you know, being where the students are, as I always say, collegiate recovery is not an 8 to 5 thing. In fact, collegiate recovery is probably after 3 o'clock, and probably as late as 6 or 7 o'clock on the college campus. So being able to be present where the students are eating, their lunch, or just happen to be hanging out, being at their student organizations, and showing that you are present, that you are in the know, and you are available, are the key processes in the outreach.
We want to thank you both. And we're about to close out, but we want to ask if you both had any final remarks before we do close out.
My favorite quote really talks about if you want to, remain bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and have that I want to save the world attitude, start with yourself. And that goes for self-work. That goes for, breaking generational curses. That goes for facing trauma, developing better mental health coping skills, all of those things. Because once we start to ignite that within ourselves, it does radiate, it does emit from us, and it draws other people closer. It draws people that we need in our life closer, as well as it helps us to serve as a model for other people to start doing their own work as well, so that we can support each other effectively and stop trying to save each other, so to speak. And that's true in any field or realm of work.
Yeah. I'll say this, right? Individually, you are the experts of your lives, but even LeBron James, Serena Williams, the top athletes have coaches, right? And for good reason. And the reality of that is, even those coaches would never be nowhere near the type of athlete that any of those are. But having that outside perspective and someone that can say, hey, not necessarily if I were you, I would do it this way, but hey, based on what you've shown me, you should do this and you'll be that much better. And so, that's the way that I approach, counseling. That's the way I approach my life. Like I told you before, I have my tribe around me, and those folks can point into my life and say, hey, based on what you told me, based on what I've seen, try this, or tell me what you get when you do that. And I'm a better person for it.
Great. We would like to thank you both once again for joining us and giving this great insight and information and knowledge. Please follow us on all our social media platforms. Follow us on Instagram at NCCU_collegiate recovery, at NCCU_counseling center, and on Facebook. Also, please be on the lookout for our next monthly live stream in June. Have a great day, everyone.
Take care.